As the United States and Europe grapple with asylum seekers, a new report from the United Nations takes an in-depth look at the shifts in global migration. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. There is now a record number of displaced people around the world as violence and climate change forcibly remove people from their homelands. That is the grim reality outlined in a new report from the United Nations that tracks global migration trends. CGTN's Tony Waterman has more from Texas, which has seen record numbers of migrants crossing the U.S. southern border.
This near 400-page report neatly condenses what are often quite chaotic scenes and politically charged rhetoric around the issue of immigration, and the numbers are quite stark. According to the UN report, 3.6% of the global population is now displaced. That is roughly 280 million people, and an increasing number of them, according to the report, are being displaced due to conflict, violence, political or economic instability, as well as climate change and other disasters.
Most migration is now taking place between relatively wealthy countries, and that is a change from the past. The migration pathways that are available for people from less developed countries have narrowed in recent years, arguably driving more people to resort to irregular migration pathways.
And those irregular migration pathways are often more dangerous. The report says around 8,500 migrants died or went missing last year. The Darien Gap, for example, separating South and Central America, has become this gateway to the U.S. southern border, particularly for Venezuelans. But it is an extremely treacherous tropical rainforest controlled by criminal organizations. The report also delves into the economic benefits of migration for developing nations. International remittances jumped more than 650% from 2000 to 2022 to hit $830 billion. This money is often a main driver of GDP in low-income economies, and the report says remittances now top foreign direct investment in those countries. The overall trend, though, is for wealthy nations clamping down further on migration flows, and we see this playing out in governments across the globe. Officials in the UK, for example, have started rounding up asylum seekers that they plan to deport to Rwanda, while here in the U.S., former President Donald Trump has vowed to order the largest deportation of migrants in U.S. history if he is reelected. And he has also not ruled out building detention centers along the U.S. border to house migrants who have entered the country illegally. The UN is saying that the political rhetoric is unrealistic and that the world needs migration and migration policies that are strategic and informed by data, not driven by short-lived political gain. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Austin, Texas.
For more now on the UN migration report and the challenges of mass migration, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Brussels is Shada Islam. She's the managing director of the global advisory company New Horizons Project. From Buenos Aires, Remi Piet is senior partner with Embellie Advisory, a boutique consultancy. Here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio, Rafael Bernal is a staff writer for the political website The Hill, and Nayla Rush is senior researcher at the Center for Immigration Studies in Washington, D.C. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Nayla, great to have you with us. Let me start with you. So we just heard that UN report on migration estimates that about 281 million people are displaced worldwide because of conflict, violence, climate change, and other disasters as well. And as we also heard, that's a huge increase over the past few decades. And now we are seeing another phenomenon with people moving from relatively wealthy countries to other wealthy countries. How big a change is that, and what's the impact globally?
Hi, thank you for having me, and I'd be happy to answer as much as I can with the short time allocated. Remember, with this number, you have 71 million people internally displaced, so it's not people who are leaving their countries to go somewhere else. So this migration has always been there, it's always going to be there, and it's definitely has taken a peak since COVID ended and throughout these past years everywhere in the US, but also in Australia, Canada, and Europe. the difference, I think, the main difference is that it has become so politicized that you can't really debate about migration issues with some kind of a nuance that you need to give to all issues that touch on every aspect of human life, economy, culture, environment, etc. What we've seen is a peak also of the entry or migration, migrants leaving not because they were persecuted, not they are fleeing because they are fleeing wars or are in danger for their lives, but migrants who want a better life. Some come to the US, some come to the UK, etc. You mentioned the Rwanda deal. I just want to talk a little bit about that and move on to the US. The Rwanda deal was the idea is that if you come to a country and you say you are persecuted and you want asylum, so you want protection, once you are in that country, it's very difficult to process, specifically if there are so many applicants, candidates for that, which are backlogging the system. And so as you are the choice is either to stay in a detention center for months and months and months, and that's, or being released into the country with some rights and benefits as your application is being heard. And more often than not, we know that these applicants' success into asylum is 80% negative, 85% negative. And so remember that those who are coming to the UK and then, the Rwanda deal, hence the Rwanda deal, have come through France. France is a safe country. They were not in danger there. So they are coming from France to the UK because it's a choice they are making.
Yeah.
The idea is that if you're going to process people, not because they just want to come to a country and have a better life, but because they're really persecuted, we need to cut this incentive of just coming to the UK and being released and then living a life meanwhile. So the idea is to process somebody elsewhere. It is working. We have seen the Rwanda deal, a lot of interviews of migrants saying, I don't want to go there anymore.
Right.
And
Right.
actually, and just let me finish with this
Yeah.
point. Actually, those who are based in Northern Ireland, who is part of the UK, are now moving to the Republic of Ireland, which
Right.
is not in the UK, and it is not, the Republic of Ireland is not
Yeah.
happy. So it's working. It is cutting the incentive. It's not necessarily about protection
Right.
rights.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
about for a better life.
Okay, I want to talk more about that a little later in the program. But Remi, Piet, when we talk about migration, it's often seen as something very negative. I mean, we see pictures of people lining up, especially here at the southern border of the United States. We see people trying to cross the ocean in very small boats, people crossing very dangerous rivers, often with their children. But this UN report, as we heard in our report, also highlights an increase in international remittances. So there is a positive side to it. That's the kind of money that people send back to their families back home. And those remittances rose from 128 billion in 2000 to 831 billion in 2022. And as our reporter pointed out, in many instances, this is the top foreign direct investment for many, many countries, many of these countries being developing countries. So what do you make of this positive side of migration and how it contributes to economies?
I mean, you're absolutely right in the fact that for many countries now, especially Central America, African countries, the remittances from migrating population to Europe or to North America have become the central and main source of income for countries. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I tend to think that unfortunately for issuing countries of migrants, relying on transfers of capital from outside rather than actually the presence of industrial capacities or domestic economic capacities is not such a good thing, because it's really becoming much more dependent on the capacities of foreigners to bring back money to the country rather than on the structural of the economies itself. However, there's one key point that is very, very interesting to look at, is that there's a lot of criticism of migrants coming to first world countries, especially on question of identities and questions of politics. But in truth, migration to Europe and migration to North America are a very strong positive for the countries themselves. I mean, often migrants are taking jobs that natives don't want to do usually. They also are, the migrants are unfortunately for countries from Africa and Central and South America are not the elderlies or the least capable of the countries. They're usually the most educated and the younger workforce, and so we're seeing a transfer of capacities of skills going to North America and Europe that would be deeply needed for South America and African countries. So when you look at the economics of it, migration is actually a very good thing for receiving countries, as opposed to what is currently said by many populistic parties from the extreme right, just making claims on the identity basis.
Right. Shada, good to see you. Let's talk about the situation in Europe. In 2023, over 1 million migrants claimed asylum in the European Union, and this has been something that has been discussed among the member states for a long, long time. They've now endorsed reforms to what is essentially a broken system. EU ministers recently approved new measures, but critics say these new measures mean that those people who are trying to get into the EU will be stopped at the border. They'll be detained at the border, and the intention is actually to keep people out. So what do these new measures do? How will they work?
Well, Anand, I'm one of those critics. Let me say that very frankly. We in the European Union claim to have very good values. We go around the world talking about our human rights and our standards. And what we're doing when it comes to migration, it's deterrence. It's in violation of almost all international conventions that protect refugees, asylum seekers. We used to criticize and did it very publicly and openly when the former President Donald Trump was talking about fences and the kind of situation that Tony there was talking about on the borders of the US. And now that has become mainstream across the European Union. And that I find absolutely abhorrent and unacceptable for a European Union that is built on the basis of values and principles. So I am one of those critics, and I'll tell you, we're building a fortress Europe. I mean, you used to criticize the Americans, and we're doing exactly the same thing with a little bit of a lag, I'll say, but it's become mainstream, as I said. The Rwanda deal is one aspect of it, and you may have read recent reports in the US, Washington Post and others talking about the other very dirty cash for migration control deals that the EU has been striking with Egypt, Morocco, Mauritania. And these governments, who are not upholders of human rights, are dumping those Black African migrants into the desert. Many, of course, are dying in the Mediterranean Sea as well. So what are we seeing? We're seeing Fortress Europe, we're seeing detention camps, including for children. So we're dehumanizing children, which is absolutely unacceptable in today's world. And we know from experience, we know that border controls don't really work. Pathways, legal pathways aren't there. So people find different ways of coming into Europe, irregular, treacherous, often die in the process. But then when they arrive here, they're detained, right? And so we have trafficking, human trafficking, smuggling, deaths in the sea. This is absolutely unacceptable. And this new migration pact that you've talked about, Anand, doesn't change that. What I've said in my criticism is that the same narrative, the same toxic narrative, the same corrosive and anti-human rights measures, just relabeled, repackaged in new bottles. They've called it a historic breakthrough. I think it's absolutely a total violation of what the European Union stands for and should stand for. We're giving in to the far right. We're giving in to the racist calls from the far right. And as you know, with elections coming up, we have our elections in a couple of weeks. The far right is ascendant, and its message, its rhetoric, its narrative, which is racist and xenophobic, has been amplified and in many ways is being embraced by our mainstream politicians.
Okay, Rafael, situation here in the United States in 2023 again, we look at that year. U.S. Customs and Border Patrol agents encountered 393,000 asylum seekers, but Mexico is now stopping 3 times as many migrants. Why this response from Mexico?
The United States is exporting its human rights violations to Mexico. Mexico is more than willing to execute those human rights violations, because let's remember when Mexico redisplaces people internally, flies people from the north back to the south, it's basically doing the same thing as Europe and Egypt dumping people in the desert, except they're dumping people in the jungle. Why is Mexico so willing to do that? There's an election coming up in a week. in a week and a half in Mexico. What Mexico did not want at any point was the United States to comment on whether that election was being carried out in a democratic fashion, whether there was involvement of organized crime in that election. As long as the United States stayed out of Mexican politics, Mexico was willing to do basically anything to sustain its relationship with the Biden administration.
This is also happening in Panama as well. Now we have, that Panama is where the Darien Gap is, which is where most people from South America, that's what they have to move through, those jungles to get up north. It's a stretch of jungle. But now we got the newly elected president of Panama is pledging to shut down that gap, to stop people moving through. Let's listen to what he had to say. Let's watch.
De que iniciaremos.
With international aid, we will begin a process of repatriation in full compliance with the human rights of all the people there. Those who are in South America and those who would like to come need to know that whoever arrives here is going to be sent back to their country of origin.
So, Rafael, this is tough. I mean, this is tough stuff that they're talking about. Is it going to deter people from coming to the border?
I mean, good luck with deterrence.
Yeah.
The irony over like what all your other guests have been talking about, and countries keep trying deterrence. All the fear-mongering that led to this political climate where these measures are popular and politicians follow these measures just either to curry favor with the United States in the case of Mexico and Panama, or to curry favor with voters in the case of the European Union or the United States. All the fear-mongering didn't come true. They said there was going to be more criminality, some kind of cultural erosion. There were some less savory, bigoted arguments also that are making their way into the mainstream. All that made its way into the mainstream. The other side was not able to say, the more you restrict immigration, the more human rights violations will happen, the more chaotic it will become. But that did come true, and the other one didn't come true. So we're really covering this issue in the face of, against all evidence.
Nayla, Shada Islam mentioned that Washington Post report, which was just published this week, actually. It was published together with other media, and it showed that there are countries which are supporting and financing very aggressive operations by governments in North Africa to detain thousands of migrants, and then they dump them in desert areas in Tunisia, in Morocco, in Mauritania. And as you mentioned right at the top of the show, this arrangement between Rwanda and the United Kingdom, where people seeking asylum in the United Kingdom are then put on planes and sent to the Central African country of Rwanda. I mean, how troubling are these trends, and what can be done to stop them?
I'm afraid this is called what we call externalization in migration, meaning you are paying somebody to hold migrants to come to your country. You are paying, and more often than not, these are corrupt countries, as we know. The last one was $1 billion paid to the Lebanese government to stop people from leaving Lebanon into Cyprus by boats. So the idea is, if we pay Turkey, if we bribe Libya, etc., they won't come to us. So we would rather pay for them to stay where they are than they come to us. And that's called externalization. It works sometimes it fails, because then these countries start blackmailing Europe, like we've seen with Libya and Turkey. Oh, I'm going to open up the the front, and like using migrants as a weapon, weaponization.
Yeah.
I would like to address a little bit about the southern border with Mexico. It's not 350,000 asylum seekers. We've had some 7 to 8 million migrants crossing the border from Mexico these past few years under the Biden administration. And even by the Biden admission, has been some kind of a crime. What you need to understand is that not all these people are fleeing persecution or are in need of protection. However, most of these people have learned that if you claim asylum, it becomes an entry ticket to the United States, because the United States is obliged by international law to at least claim. So, but the problem also is that the immigration system has been so backlogged that the fastest you can have is have an immigration court in 2, 3, 4, 5 years and then come back. Most don't come back. But then meanwhile, they are in the United States.
Yeah,
now, I want to open the border to anybody who wants to come in. That's a choice, right?
Okay, I just want to get, Nayla, I just want to get a quick response to what you were saying here from Rafael. Go ahead.
One point of clarification, that's been 7 to 8 million encounters. Many people try and try again. And the summary expulsion measures like Title 42, remain in Mexico, some that the Biden administration has used, especially Title 42, made it so that many migrants would try, get expelled, try again, get expelled, try again, get expelled.
Okay, Remi, the Congressional Budget Office here in Washington, which is a bipartisan agency here in the United States, it calculated that immigration will generate a $7 trillion boost to the U.S. economy over the next decade. And one economist stated, no advanced economy is benefiting from immigration quite like the United States. In fact, the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, has cited immigration as one of the reasons behind strong economic growth in this country. What is the role that immigration is playing in the numbers that we're seeing?
No, you're absolutely right to mention this actually quite interesting economic study. There is a strong contribution, as I was mentioning, of immigrants and especially the younger people that pass the frontier to the domestic economy of the U.S. If you actually look at the key numbers, migrants flying to entering the U.S. become obviously consumers. They do have the positive impact on the economy is much stronger than the strain on potential infrastructure, social infrastructure that anti-immigration politicians are claiming are so important. In truth, the positive and the balance is actually much positive for the U.S., especially also when you actually put into the equation the fact that a lot of the migrants from countries such as Colombia, from Central America through Mexico have been displaced because of a series of insecurity, rise of mafias, of drug cartels that are also the result of a series of policies towards those countries, from the war on drugs in Colombia, in Mexico, that has been much more securitizing those issues and creating much more insecurity in those countries. The problem is that there's no comprehensive approach to trying to have joint developments in the Western Hemisphere, trying to build the capacities for Central Americans and Latin American countries to create and strengthen the economy. Same thing actually for let's say European take on Northern Africa. There was a try for the Union during the Sarkozy administration on the Union for the Mediterranean, but you need to be able to look at those elements comprehensively, build the capacities for indigenous development to be able to then not just need and pick the best of those countries for your own economy. So it's important to take it comprehensively, and that is what has not happened over the last few years in the Americas or Northern African and Europe nexus.
Right. Shada, when we look at these numbers, they show us how beneficial immigration is to the United States and its economy. But is that kind of debate also being held among the European nations? Some of the attitudes in Europe are very, they're alarming. There was a Danish think tank that found that Europeans, especially Germans, fear immigration. They fear it more than climate change. So do Europeans ever see immigration as being something that's very positive?
Yes, they do. I think there are serious think tanks here, serious people like myself, if I may say so, who do believe that migration managed properly, done, with dignity and respect of human rights, is very beneficial to us. We're desperately in need of foreign workers in the skilled sector. You go to any hospital across Europe, and and this is a reality that all of us go. Our doctors, our cancer specialists, our nurses, our essential workers, our scientists producing vaccines are all foreign born or born of parents migrants who were originally from outside the European Union. So we're seeing it in our essential workers, our transport systems, our health sector, education sector. We know that our budgets are running short of cash, and we are in Europe an aging society. We all know that. So the European Commission, which is the EU executive, does come out once in a while with very serious reflection on the need for foreign labor, telling people in a very rational way, we need to have foreign workers. We need a kind of green card system. I think the Germans even have one called the blue card system. And then you have a backlash by the far right, which is toxically and, inherently anti-migrant, racist, Islamophobic, xenophobic, ethno-nationalist, call it what you will. And because our politicians, our mainstream politicians at the moment are really not very powerful, not very self-confident, they tend to follow that lead and hoping that voters will vote for them. Now, there has been research, Anand, showing that for voters across Europe, migration is not such a big deal. You're quoting a German study, which may be there, but there's a Eurobarometer poll that shows that for our European voters, 500 million of us, migration is not top of the list. It's health, it's social security, it's defense. So there's two other points, if I may just come in. One is the brain waste. Now, all of these refugees and migrants that we're keeping in detention centers, sending off to Rwanda or dumping in deserts, they're not all, absolutely hopeless people. These are people with energy, a spirit of adventure, a spirit of entrepreneurship. These are strong people. And there is a great deal of brain waste going around. We're wasting the brains and the energy of these people. And then there's also a question of brain circulation. I mean, if you had legal pathways, proper partnerships, then people would come in, go out, and there would not be this problem that one of your colleagues has talked about, which is of, developing countries losing skills and people. So across Europe, whether it's in our agriculture, whether it's in our health sector, we need migrants. And if we don't have migrants, our economies, which are already sort of, chugging along slowly, are really going to dry up. And that, I think, is something that if we had self-confident politicians, we would hear more often.
Okay, I am
people
rapidly
are willing to listen.
Yeah, I'm rapidly running out of time. I want to get one final point to Rafael. Rafael, we see the positive benefits of immigration here in the United States. Unlike Europe, it's a huge election issue here in the United States. Why has it been so difficult for immigration advocates to sell the benefits to the American people?
And in short, because it's very easy to sell fear. And it's very easy to sell fear of the unknown. And the right has taken, not really the right, the populists like Donald Trump have taken absolute advantage of that situation in order to gain political power. It is a strategy that has worked and will continue to work.
Okay, and that is where we are going to have to leave it. We have run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.